I want to talk to you today about the risks of artificial intelligence. The risks aren't what Hollywood would have you believe. They're not some super intelligent android robot with consciousness and evil intent that's planning to take over the planet and kill humanity. That is a very long way away, if ever possible. We don't know if we can ever build machines as intelligent as that, and we don't know if we'll ever build machines that have anything approaching sentience, consciousness. But what we already see are risks that are appearing that are much more near term and much more to do with what might be called stupid artificial intelligence. We're handing over more mundane decisions to machines, and those are already having consequences. We see it with these self-driving trucks that you can see behind me. I want to break the risks down into a number of different categories: economic risks, political risks, societal risks, and military risks. I'll begin with the economic risks. And one of the most immediate economic risks that we see, one that surely is going to be increased by the pandemic and the recession that has provoked in many economies, is the economic risk of increasingly handing over jobs to machines. And we have seen that that's a steady trend that's happened over the last 50 or 100 years. If you go into a car factory today, it's not humans anymore that are doing the painting and welding, it's machines. Now, I normally point out that whenever a machine takes over a person's jobs, we should be celebrating that fact. That was a mundane, repetitive, dull job that we probably never should have got humans to doing. But there is a significant economic risk. What is going to happen to those people who are no longer employed in those jobs? Is there gainful employment? Is there sufficient income for those people? And we're already seeing increasing inequality both within and between countries. And I fear that that is only going to increase as AI becomes more and more capable, especially driven, we've seen historically in the past, that shocks like the current pandemic will tend to increase the speed with which businesses adopt automation. And so that's a very real risk. We see this perhaps most starkly in this one graph, the only graph I'm going to present today, which is the median wages adjusted to 1970 money. And you can see that we saw productivity plotted on the same graph, median wages increase almost linearly since the beginning of the 19th century. And then there's a big disconnect that happens around the 70s as we start to adopt computing. And median wages no longer now follow productivity. We've seen continuing gains in productivity, and we'll see those continue no doubt. But we see median wages stagnating. And that shows that whilst we run the real risk that many of us are going to be left behind as the rich or the very rich get much richer, and the worker on the street gets left behind. Besides those economic risks, there are real political risks. We see this already with a number of technologies within artificial intelligence. We see this with deep fakes. It is now possible to generate entirely realistic video and audio that you cannot tell apart from the real thing. And we are going to end up in a world, unless you saw it with your own eyes, you won't know whether it's true. And that is creating this problem of not knowing what is true anymore. And we already see politicians, we saw it with Trump, where there was compromising video caught of him saying things where he just denied it by saying it was a deep fake. And politicians are going to be able to get away with more and more by claiming that the video was faked. And those I predicted that there's going to be a significant election that's going to be turned at the last moment by the release of some sort of deep fake. But other aspects, other technologies within AI are also creating these political risks that are disrupting the cohesion of our societies. We see this with, for example, with micro-targeting advertising. We see the misuse of social media that is changing the outcome of elections, changing who is president, perhaps probably changed the Brexit referendum. We have very strict rules in many countries about the uses and misuses of conventional media, television and the like, for very good reason, that we know that these are very powerful means of persuasion. And we don't want the media barons or the people with the most airtime to win elections. We want the people with the most democratic support, with the best democratic ideas. And so I think we really have to worry about, we now have a new form of media, social media, which is even more persuasive and can, at scale and at speed and at cost that we've never seen before, manipulate how people are willing to vote. There are also lots of other significant societal risks that artificial intelligence threatens us with. I think one of the greatest ones is the use or the misuse of face recognition. We are now able to recognize people in real time. This is one of these boiling frog problems, where we got used to the idea that there were plentiful CCTV cameras on every street corners. But we weren't unduly concerned about that, because we knew there were too many cameras for people to be looking at. But the problem now is that we can put software behind those cameras, we can put computer vision algorithms behind those algorithms, and we can track people in real time. And we can do that at the level of the nation state. And we see this, we see the worrying trends already happening. You see this in countries like China, where such software is being used to help persecute the Uyghurs. We saw this in Hong Kong recently, when the democratic demonstrators invaded the airport. What was the first thing they did? They took down the cameras. That was the greatest threat to their ability to protest. And we also see that even in democratic countries like our own in Australia, where the government is trying to build a national database so that anyone with a passport photograph or anyone with a driving license will be in a national database, and that will be able to track people in real time. And I do think that perhaps we're just going to have to ban that technology, at least from public spaces. But we see this in many other settings. I'm always amazed that people are out there buying smart speakers and then ask me, and are surprised to discover that those speakers are always listening. I always say to them, the only reason that they can always answer when you say Alexa or Google is because they're always listening. George Orwell got one thing wrong. It's not the state that's going to be putting listening devices into all our homes that we're unable to turn off. People are voluntarily doing this, but paying good money to do this to themselves. And on top of those economic risks, those political risks and those societal risks, I think there are significant military risks. And myself and many of my other colleagues working in the field of artificial intelligence have spoken quite vocally about these military risks. The risks of lethal autonomous weapons, the fact that we'll be handing over the decisions to machines as to who lives and who dies. This often goes under the name of killer robots. And that, again, that raises that spectre, that Hollywood idea of Terminator robots, but actually it's much simpler technologies. Things like drones that will be soon fully autonomous. At the moment, the drones are not fully autonomous, they're only semi-autonomous. It's large, there's still a human in the loop, this is still a human in control. But they mostly fly themselves, they just get given coordinates now, go from A to B, but there's still a human whose finger is on the trigger. But it's a small technical distance to remove that human from the trigger and have a machine make the decision as to who to target and who to kill. And we already see such weapons, such kamikaze drones being deployed. At the beginning of this year, Turkey on its border with Syria deployed some squadrons of kamikaze drones, self-made homegrown kamikaze drones that use face recognition software. The same face recognition software that sits in your mobile phone, that opens the mobile phone, will be used on the Turkish-Syrian border to identify, track, and potentially kill human targets on the ground. And there are immense legal, moral, and technical challenges to handing over those sorts of decisions to machines. On a legal setting, it's clear that this will violate international humanitarian law. On a moral setting, I believe it will cross a red line, handing over these decisions to machines that don't have our human empathy, cannot be held accountable like humans, cannot be punished. And there are many, many, many technical challenges that they will be terribly destabilizing, that we may end up in flash wars. Well, actually, we already know what happens when we put complex algorithms, autonomous algorithms together in settings. It's called the stock market, and we see flash crashes. When that happens, we are able to stop what happens, wind back the clock and undo all the trades and say, I'm very sorry that there was some unfortunate feedback loop or whatever it was that caused that flash crash. But if it's autonomous weapons facing off against each other, perhaps on the DMZ between North and South Korea, we may have found that not only did we start a war, we started a nuclear war, something that we can't easily undo. So, what are the solutions? There are many complex problems here, and there is not one silver bullet, I believe, or my colleagues believe, working in the field, to be able to deal with these things. There's clearly technical fixes that we need to work on, and there's plentiful work already going on in the field of artificial intelligence to look at how do we make algorithms that are fairer, that are auditable, that can be held accountable for their decisions. But it's not just technical fixes. It's not just about coming up with better, smarter algorithms. We need regulatory fixes. There was a long period during which we believed that you couldn't and you shouldn't regulate the tech space, the cyberspace. You couldn't because somehow it was different. It was not physical. It reached across national borders. And you shouldn't, because that would stifle innovation and all the wonderful things that would come from innovation. And actually we're believing the opposite now, that you can and you should, and indeed it's necessary. And we've already seen some wonderful examples of this. We saw this, for example, immediately after the terrible tragedy that happened in Christchurch, that it was possible actually to draft regulation to call the social media companies to account for content that's posted on their websites if they don't take it down quickly enough. And when we see this more recently, in addition to those technical fixes, those regulatory fixes, it's clear also that we will need financial fixes to deal with issues like that, increasing inequality. The tech giants have got away with paying real tax rates way below those of traditional companies. That's no longer sustainable. It's causing significant disruption. We've seen the challenges that the media industry its advertising income has been taken away by the tech giants, and rightly, I believe, we're going to have to make sure that they do, if they're not willing to pay tax, that we tax them more heavily to ensure that they do. And I think one of the good things, at least, that's come out of the pandemic is that it's opened our eyes to the idea that we can think of more radical things, for example, universal basic income, to deal with some of the disruption that's going to happen through AI and the disruption on the workforce. Now, I don't want you to come away from my presentation thinking that AI just poses immense challenges, immense risks, because also AI can be a great force for good. Myself and many of my colleagues work on dealing with AI being applied to the 17 SDGs of the United Nations. Many of the problems I suspect that you're talking about today are ones that AI is going to be part of the solution, whether it be the climate emergency or future pandemics. There are many places where artificial intelligence, we're having machines that can make smart decisions, that can do that at speed and scale and at cost that humans can't manage, and look at data sets that humans can't possibly look at. There are many settings where AI is actually going to help us deal with some of these wicked problems, because we do face some really wicked problems like the climate emergency and like increasing inequality. And so I get up in the morning to work on AI because I see the immense positives as well as the significant risks. It is a dual-use technology, and we want to ensure that we get the good without the bad. Thank you very much.